So this webinar, once again, is managing libraries of parts with Windchill 11. And the layout of this is pretty much the same as we've done in the past. So we'll go through and talk about the actual boundary systems as a whole. We'll then give an overview, just a kind of scenario overall as far as how things kind of would work in real world application, and then I should say outside of the engineering world application. And then we'll go into the actual presentation for Windchill, and we'll go through and now relate everything that we've talked about. With that, of course, with managing of those parts. And then once everything is completed, or I'm done with the demonstration, we'll have a question and answer session to answer any questions that we have after that. With that, there is a comments area or question area over on in your display that you can go in and use to actually go through and ask any questions. And I will ask those, or I will answer those as they come in. I'll try to just wait until the end of the presentation to go through and answer all the questions. So if you do have a question even during the presentation, go ahead and ask it. I may not get to it right away, but I will go through and actually address the questions that you all may have. All right. So, of course, my name is Michael Wimberly. I am a senior technical specialist here at Boundary Systems. I've been working with PTC products for over 20 years now. I am a certified trainer for Creo as well as Windchill, and then also certified implementation specialist for Windchill as well. About Boundary Systems, we are once again a technology leader company. So we actually have quite a bit that we do inside of our company. So we also, of course, work with PTC products, the whole range of those. We also have Solid Thinking. We have eTraj. We also have ZW CAD and some additional technology companies that we work with as well. We are always number 16 fastest growing private company within the Cleveland area. And some of our capabilities that we have are, of course, product lifecycle management. We also have data management. We have CAD design and consulting. We have simulation that we can go through and do for you, as well as product development as a whole. So we have quite a bit that we can do. That's why we consider ourselves a technology leader, because we cover quite a range of things that we can do for you. And then, of course, some additional things. We've also had industry awards, such as being a part of the Inc. 5000, as well as the Weatherhead 100, as far as the fastest growing companies in Northeastern Ohio. And then some accreditations that we have, of course, Windchill Certified Implementer. We are, of course, a PTC Preferred Service Provider, and, of course, a PTC Certified Training Partner. And then here's just a list of some of the solutions that we have. So once again, we have our PTC product as a whole. We have Solid Thinking, we have eTraj, we have Modex, we have Flow, EFD, and then of course ZW CAD as an additional option that we can go in and use. So all the different services that we provide are used with some of these softwares that we have here. All right. And then if you have any information you want to contact me through email or through phone, here is my contact information. So any technical questions that you have, you can contact me at my phone number, 513-415-0747, or my email address at mwimberly@boundarysystems.com. If you have any sales-related questions, you can also contact Carrie Dillon, and her number is 440-409-5898, or cdillon@boundarysystems.com. So we'll go ahead and get started. Now, when we talk about libraries, most companies, you deal with small companies. Most companies start out with small libraries, so things are nice and small and organized. We take our time to make sure everything is nice and put in its proper places. You can even look here. We've even color-coded things, so things are nice and organized. Once again, but as we continue to grow and we continue to grow, we continue to accumulate more stuff, then it becomes a little less organized. We still have a lot of information. You can see in the back that we still tried to maintain our organization, but it didn't work very well. We started not having enough time because projects got bigger, or we just got more information that we needed to, so we just started throwing stuff, piling stuff up. This is once again what we consider organized chaos. So we may know where everything is, but we will probably be the only ones that know where that stuff is. So what we need to do is now take time to go through and organize this stuff. So now we need to go through and take that and now organize it a little bit better. So as our library continues to grow, it grows in organization. So we go through and categorize different things. So as we can see here, it's a pretty large library, but I'm sure things are divided just like you go into a bookstore. You know, you have your mysteries over here, you have your anime over here, you have your romance novels, you know, whatever it is, you know, biographies, all those things are divided. So it's still organized, but now we still have to go in and still find all that information. Now, as we go through, you know, through time, that organization has changed as well. So when we had the smaller structure, you know, just a small number of books, the thing we need to go through and organize, and this next slide will kind of take you all back. So those that you know are my age or older, I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but you may recognize this. There's your card holder. So when you went to the library, you actually would go through and pull out a card and actually go, it would tell you where on that shelf or in that library you would actually go through and find that particular book. But once again, as our library began to grow, then that small little box that we had basically became inadequate. So we needed more information. So we went from something very small to something very large. So now we're looking at more information and more structure, and now going in and searching those different cards to say, okay, this book that you need, you're looking for biographies, okay, that's in this section of the library on this shelf in this area. So it's got more complicated, more complicated. But even this system right here, we're still browsing to go in and find the information. As things have changed and technology has come into play, things have gotten quite a bit easier. So what we've been able to do is now go through and now just use a computer. So that whole system that we had here of all those library cards have now been consolidated into a computer system. And now when we need to go through and find something very simply, we simply go through and search for it. Okay, we know the title of the book, type it in. We know the topic of the book, type it in. You know, so we can go through and now find the information that we need quite a bit faster than we did in the past. So now we can simply go through and find our information a lot easier. So we don't necessarily have to browse through everything to go in and find it. So we just simply walk through the library and say, oh, there's a section right there. Okay, it could be in this category, or maybe it could be in this category, but we're not sure. Computer technologies has allowed us to go through and now filter that information a lot quicker than we have in the past. So now, as I said, over time, things have changed, which is a good thing. With most things, change are good. Change is good. Changes in the way we organize and search for things has truly evolved, as we see with the library that we just saw. So we went from the card shelves to actually going in and now having a computer that we would go through and use. So with that, we can not only just apply that to what we saw in a library where we've organized hardware or organized books, we can also do that with our library as well. So inside of Windchill, we have the ability, of course, to now create our library. Now, how do we organize our library? That's on us. So do we have one library that has all our hardware, or do we just have one library that has everything? And we have our motors in there, we have our hardware in there, we have our electrical stuff in there, so everything is categorized or just set in one folder, or do we organize it a little bit differently? But we can go through and now organize that our way, and find things the way we want to in our libraries themselves. So at this point, I'll go ahead and jump into the demonstration. So what we're looking at here is now we're going in and we're looking at Windchill. Now, what we're looking at currently is actually Windchill 10.2. So we're actually going and looking at 10.2 version of it. Now, with that, we can still go through, we can browse, and then up here we have the ability to filter down and just looking at libraries. So I can go through and say view all my libraries. So for this one, we have one single library. We'll go through to our library, and now we can go through and specify, okay, are we looking for electrical or mechanical parts? Think it's a mechanical part, so I'll go through and select mechanical, and then there's all our mechanical files. So we can go through and actually browse to go in and find that information. Or we can still come over to our search tool and use our search functionality, and we'll go in and look for, let's say, a nut. And it'll go through and find this weld nut. Now, Is that all the nuts that we have? Not necessarily sure. But right now, that's the one that it found for us. We can always edit our criteria. I'm going to go through and move that from our keyword up here, down here, to now searching for nut functionality. And if you notice now, we actually have more information. So depending on how we're going in and searching for things, this one found all these different types of nuts that are now listed in here. But now, how do we go through and filter this? So now we want to go through and filter. There's no way of doing it other than looking in and say, okay, I want to filter this table. I just want to go through and look for hex. So I want to filter that down to a hex nut, and now to filter it down that way. But this is all more of a manual process. What we can also do inside of Windchill is with Parts Link, we can go through and set up different classifications. So we can now go through and say, okay, yes, this is a mechanical file. But what type of mechanical file is it? Well, it's a bolt, or it's a screw, or it's a nut, or it's a washer. So what we also want to be able to do is now go through and find classifications of documents or of items. So instead of going into our search here, at the very top, we have our drop down for our classification search. So inside of here, we now have our categories. So this is now looking at our libraries and the information that we've classified. So over here on the left side, we have our electrical parts. And over here on the right side, we have our mechanical parts. So as we go through and we select on the mechanical parts, it now begins to break down the mechanical parts that we have. So as you can see, we have underneath mechanical parts, we have fasteners and we have springs. We can now go through and specify, okay, there's 5 pins, there's 5 bolts, there's 19 nuts, and there's 2 washers. Let's go in and see what the different nuts are. When we go through and select on the nuts, now it breaks down the nuts into their different categories as well. We have a hex nut, a self-locking nut, standard nut, a T-nut, and then a welding nut. And as you can see, for each one of those, it shows us the actual nut, the number of hex nuts that are actually listed underneath there. So we can still go through and use, our searching functionality to go through and find this information. We can come back over here and then just search for, hex, and allow it to go in and show us the information that it finds for the hex. So we can continue to go through and manipulate and add additional information for our classifications. So once again, this is actually using Parts Link, and it's also using, we would actually go through and use our index searching. Now, it would be nice if we could take this same functionality and make it accessible in our search tool. It would also be nice if we could actually use some of this functionality just simply within our regular search tool. Well, since you mentioned it, let's see if we can do that. Now we're in in Windchill 11. So inside of Windchill 11, if I now go over into my search tool, I can now go in and see I still have my search history and save searches. I still have my advanced search. And then if you now look, that classification explorer. So that same classification explorer that was up here is now part of our regular search tool. So I can come over here to my advanced search, and I will come over here and I'll do nut. And then there it goes in and shows me the actual nut functionality, or all the nuts that it actually found. Quite a few of them. I can also go through and expand. Over here on the left side, it now gives me some categories that I can go through and now filter by. So this is just general information. So it still allows me to go through and use some of the indexing information. So I can come through and specify what context I want to go through and look for. I know that what I'm looking for is within our commercial components. So I'm going to go in and select commercial components, and it'll filter my listing from 85 down to 19. And now from there, my filters are a little bit different. So I have created on, last modified, who created it, and when it was last modified. Modified by. So we have that information. But what I also want to be able to search by is I really want to search by the criteria of my information. So to do that, instead of doing my advanced search, I'm going to come over here to Classification Explorer. And then inside of here, I'm now going to do the same search for the nut. Sorry. Maybe not for the nut. Did I not change it? Of course, it's a demo, so something's going to act strange. So let's try that again. And I am going to search for, of course, it's not going to act up. I promise you it did it a moment ago. It's not there, it's not there. Of course. I don't know why it's not working. It's working, that's on. Oh, gotta love demos. I apologize. Once again, not sure why all of a sudden it doesn't want to execute my search properly. It's doing the search, but it's not giving me the information that I need. Let's start a new search. Let's go over to classification, and I'm going to change that to screw. There we go. All right. So, not sure what was going on before, why it wasn't giving me the information, but now it's actually working properly. So what I'm looking at now is I'm doing my classification search, and the information that I set up in the classifications of my actual bolts, which are set up once again in the part files. And if you do want information on how to actually set up these classifications, there is actually a webinar that we did last year that you can actually go to on our YouTube channel. To actually go in and see the information or how to actually go through and set up classifications in your different hardware. But so what we've done here is actually go through and set up classifications. So what I'm able to do is go in and specify, length. Okay, so we've gone through and it's estimating or it's giving me the values based on the information that's inside the table. So we have length information. We can go in and specify the head height, the socket size, the nominal size, and then the actual thread length. So we can go through and actually manipulate each one of these. So let's say we're looking at a particular size. So right now it's just simply showing these 5, but there's more, so I can go in and say show all, and it'll go through and show everything, which is simply 6 of them. And what I'm looking for is actually an M4. So I'm going to select M4, and now it's going to go in and filter my list down to the M4 options. Now, if you also notice when it filtered down to M4, it also filtered down the actual criteria that I can search by. So right now, my range is 4.6 to 23.5, and I'm going to go in and change this from 10 to 20. And now, once again, it's going to continue to filter down as we go through. Now, at this point, we can, of course, see those items on the screen, but we can also go through and use our drag bars up here to go through and specify lengths as well. And then allow that to go through and filter down. So what we've gone in and done, we've gone through and filtered it down. So we're looking at M4s. And now we're looking at anything from a range of 19 to 33. And the lengthwise itself, and then the actual thread length is anything from 10 to 30. So the actual overall length of the bolt, and then the actual thread length is what we set up down here. So what we're able to do is inside of our parts, go in and set up different categories. So once again, to be able to find information a lot quicker, we can go through and use our search functionality. All I just simply did at that point was go in and clear it out. So let's go in and hopefully do another search. And we can come over here and select on nut. And it's once again not giving me all the information there. So let's try this again. And see if it'll give me the information for the bolt. With the bolt, it actually gave me the categories associated with the bolts. So over here, it has a main bearing bolt. That's the first set that it gave me, and that's what we're looking at here. But what we actually want to see is we want to go through and look at our hex flange bolts. So once again, this is a way of, once again, using our filters that we've gone through and set up to go ahead and categorize our library items. So instead of, once again, just simply browsing for them, we can go through and now use our searching to go through and find each one of those. So there we have it. You know, head height, length, thread length, all that we can go through and specify. I'm looking for the overall length of a bolt to be anywhere from 30 to 100. And then once again, allow it to filter that down as well. So what I'm showing you is, once again, instead of going in, and a lot of times we've had documents that controlled where things were, whether it is Excel sheet that we had everything listed of all the bolts that we had listed in our libraries, you know, whatever it may be. We can actually come in here. If we go through and actually set up some of our classifications, we can also go through and now use that information to search for. So now we're looking at a step beyond that. So yes, we still have them categorized by the size. We still have them categorized by the length. All of that is still available that we can go through and do. And if we want to, even from within here, if we do want to simply browse, we can still browse to those different items. So we go directly into that, the hex flange bolt, and then now it allows us to go through and filter down that information. So while we're in here, if we want to go over to, you know, the socket head cap screws, it now goes in and gives us all the socket head cap screws, and now we can specify that information as well. So we have all of our search criteria. We still have the ability, once again, to do our searches. Our saved searches are still here. But one of the things that's also beneficial in our advanced search is it also allows us to incorporate our classification. So right inside of here in the middle, so instead of doing a classification explorer search, we can go through and actually specify our classification right inside of here. So I'm going to come over here and search, and now I can come down here and it goes in and gives me the listings of all the classifications that I have set up. So my classification is a hex flange bolt, you know, main bearing bolt, nuts, so on and so forth. And once again, it gives me the number of items that are actually inside of each one of those categories. So it shows me for socket head cap screws, there's 58 socket head cap screws. So I can go through and actually use that as now a filter when I'm doing my searching. And of course I did something incorrect. So if we'll just do it blank. So I can just use that as my search criteria as well to go through and search for. And then once again, I always have my filters that I can go through and use to specify the values that I want. So once again, so what we're looking at is now simply a different method of going in and maintaining our libraries. So we have our libraries that we've created, and once again, our permissions are set up on them. We've set them up however we want it to. This one has quite a few different libraries in them. So we have archives, commercial items, documents, you know, manufacturing, so on and so forth. So there's quite a few libraries that we actually have set up, and we can actually go through each one of those and specify the information that we want to look at. We have quite a few electrical items as well that we can go through and use our categories on those. Now, for those that do have electrical components, if we do go into our classifications and we go into electronic, then we have the categories that we've set up there. So if I want to go into an LED, when we go in and select the LED, the items that we've set up that we want to be able to filter by are all here. So we still have the main items that we set up. So the context as far as where it's related, where it's located. Well, we also have current. Okay, so what's the current of this LED? What's the brightness of this LED? The view angle of the LED. So there's quite a bit of information that we can go through and categorize. Once again, we're setting this up by going and using parts link that will allow us to go through and now use those categories. So like we did with when we looked at that library item. So when we're in our library, we want to search for an item. Well, you have a category for the type of item that you want, or the type of book that you're looking for, the category. You also have the name of it. So we can always search by names. We can always search by numbers. So any of that is also available for us to search by. So, I mean, I can come in here and just type in LED and it'll go through and filter down to the LEDs. So however we want to go through. So we can go through and filter however far down that we want to, or we can come back up to the top level and search for items there. So I don't remember if I have washers or not. But there we have the washers. And then once again, the size of the washers. So once again, an additional way of going in and setting up the information. Now, the other thing that we do with our items is, we have all of our different hardware. And a lot of times when manufacturing or assembly goes in and puts things together, then they're using, specific bolts to do this, specific nuts and washers to do that. So we're going in and setting up that information. So what we're also able to do is if I go in, it's going to go back into my bolts. And the bolt that I'm going to look for is going to be M10. Let's do M10 to filter it down. Actually, sorry, I'm doing it over here when I need to be doing it over here. So I can do thread length. I know that the size of this is 55. So I can go in and have the length of it 55 to 55. So it goes in and now shows me, nope, not the right bolt. Sorry. I'm not in the library. Of course, once again, gotta love when things work well. Sorry, meant to stay here. Go back into my hardware. Go back into my, I think it's the hex bolts. Yep. And then inside of here, I'm looking for my M10 by 55. So once again, it's not showing my head diameter, which I'm not sure why. So let's go ahead and filter that down to M10. There it is. All right, so with our bolts that we go through and set up, we can actually go through and once again find the information. Here we actually have the classification information that we've set up. So we have our head height, our length, our nominal size, and then the actual thread length. So we have that information that we can go through and set up and use for our different items. But what we're also able to do is go in for this hex bolt. We can also go through and specify, well, if we don't have this hex bolt, what else can we use? So we're also able to go through and set up alternates. So if we're out of this particular one, what can we use instead? So what we can go in and do is set up an alternate for this. And I'm just going to go in and use hex as the name. And for this one, I'm going to say for this application, I can go through and use the M6 by 50 part. So for this, I'm sorry, not M6, M10 by 50. The M10 by 50. So what I'm specifying is if we're out of this particular bolt, we can now go in and use that bolt. Now, the way this is set up right now as an alternate is we're basically going in and specifying that this is a one-directional substitution. which means if we're out of the M10 by 55, then we can go through and use the M10 by 50, but only in that direction. I can't go in and now substitute the M10 by 55 for the M10 by 50. So it's okay going shorter for the application, but I can't go longer. Now, that may be valid for this. But let's come over and let's find, where'd the assembly go? Looking for my bearing bolt. So I'm just going to come over here and type in bearing. All right, and then we have our bearing bolt type A. So I'm going to come over here and select on that one. And if I do a where used, I can see that this bearing bolt is used inside of this assembly. So it's a cylinder block assembly, and that cylinder block assembly is used inside the engine body. So I'm going to go right into the cylinder block assembly. So when I select on it, I can go over to its structure. All right, and then what I'll see is that it has this bearing bolt type A. What I want to be able to do is for this particular application, for just this assembly, I want to be able to go through and now substitute it out. So if we don't have, the type A, I want to be able to go in and use a different type. So what I'm able to do is come over here and select on manage replacements. So what I'm going to go through and specify is what we can use for this. Now for this one, I have already set it up that for this particular application, in this particular assembly, I can go through and substitute the bearing bolt type B in this assembly. Now this isn't an alternate, which means it doesn't mean everywhere that the bearing bolt A is used, I can substitute using bearing type B. It's just simply saying for this application in this assembly. So what we can go through and specify is the substitutes and alternates. So once again, an alternate is simply saying if I don't have this, then I'm able to go through and use this anywhere that application is anywhere this item is used. For substitutes, I can go through and specify that in this assembly only is where I can go through and now substitute this item out. So if I go back into the bolt type A and I look at related items, if I come down here at the bottom, I can see I don't have an alternate, but I do have a substitute, and it specifically tells me where that substitution can happen and what I can substitute it with. So I am able to go through and now use that additional information to go through and substitute the information or that bolt. Let's go in and look at one other part. And this one is going to be an M6 flange bolt. No, not a bolt. An M6 flange nut. That one right there. So this one, we have an actual flange nut. So if I go in, I think that's the right one. Yep. If I do a where used, I can see that this is used inside of this assembly and inside of this assembly. So if I come over here to the power steering pump, and once again I go back into the structure for it, I can come over and I can see the M6 the M6 flange nut. So with this one, I'm going to come over here and do my manage replacements. Now currently for this flange nut, there is no substitution, no alternates associated with this. So what I can come over and do is saying, once again, I could either do it for this application, for just inside of this power steering pump, or for it entirely. I can go through and wherever this isn't seen, wherever I don't have this flange nut, I can go through and now substitute this. So what I'm going to come over here and do is add an alternate part. This is going to basically be everywhere that I want to go in and use it. So I'm going to go in and use M6 as my filter. Of course. And what I'm going to actually substitute for this, I'm not going to substitute it with one item. I'm actually going to substitute it with two items. So instead of me having the flange nut, I'm going to come over here and add a plain washer and an M6 hex nut. So what I'm specifying is that if I don't have this part, I'm going to go in and now substitute these two parts for it. Now, once again, this is not going to be a two-way, because if I go into the hex nut, it's going to specify that, yeah, I can go through and substitute that. Maybe I can go in and substitute for that. But for the washer, I'm not going to substitute a nut for a washer. So what I'm simply saying here is that for this flange nut, I'm now going to go through and be able to substitute a flat washer and a hex nut in its place if I run out of those particular items. So I'll go ahead and say okay. And now one of the things that we can do inside of our assemblies when we're doing our structures is to see if we have alternates and substitutions associated with those. And what we're able to do is simply come over here and specify to go in and show replacements. And what it'll do, it'll expand it and actually show that. The other thing that's beneficial is when you're actually going in and exporting as well. I'm sorry. I can do my BOM report. I can go through and do a multi-level BOM report and show the replacements. So if this is a BOM that we need to go through and give to manufacturing or assembly, they can go in and say, okay, this is the primary object, but if I run out of this object, use these two in its place. So, and then I can go through and of course take this BOM and export it to whatever format that I want to export it to. So I have the ability to go through and do that. So if I do go back into this flange nut and look at its information, I go to related objects, I can then see that there are alternates associated with that particular item. And the alternates, once again, being the nut and the washer. Now, if I go into the nut, just the hex nut itself, because I did go through and specify not sure what it did. Yep. All right. If I go into the actual hex nut itself and I look at related objects, is that the right one? No, sorry, wrong part. I need the M6 hex nut. There, I can see that it does have the alternate set for it. So what I'm simply saying, when I went in and specified the alternate, that this was one of the alternates for that flange nut, I also set it up that it can go both directions. So if I don't have this hex nut, it's okay to substitute it with the flange nut. So I can go through and set up that as well. So there's quite a bit of information that we can go through and set up inside of here. When we also get into different items, and I'm just going to go into a different part. Actually, I'm going to go into an assembly just to go in and bring something up that has multiple versions. So something like this. One of the other things that we can go in and do, and a lot of times, most of the time, this is set up when we're going in and doing our change process. But one of the things that's also important is when we're actually going in and setting up information is to know when it was used. So when we've executed different things. So one of the things that we can also go through and set up is actually effectivity. So when did this come into play? So what we're able to do is go in and specify for our different revisions of the file, what its effectivity was, or when its effectivity was. So I'm just going to come in and set up a real quick effectivity for this, and I'm going to say that this was valid basically from the beginning of last year. Sorry, the beginning of last year, basically until now. When I say open-ended, that means it hasn't finished yet. So I can go through and set up effectivity. Now, for this, in order for this to actually to work well for you, what you'll need to do is go back into each of your revisions of this file and actually set the effectivity for those. So this would actually take a little bit of effort to actually get it to work the way you want it to work, so that if I go in and I do a BOM and I want to see what the BOM structure was, back at this particular date, I can go in and specify, okay, this part was effective in this assembly from here to here. This part was effective between here and here. Now understand that effectivity doesn't always line up with the date that it was checked in. So look at, phone releases, just simple application. iPhone actually develops their products, but they're not effective until they release the actual product. So when we get it, it's already been done, but it doesn't hit the market until that particular day. Or they have, an update that they've done, a component was replaced or software was updated, whatever it may be. You can set effectivity dates on software as well. Software is something you can actually add inside of Windchill as well. So I can go in and set that, okay, so we had a release, we had an update. If anybody has an iPhone, know the iPhone comes out with updates quite often. I think mine is actually looking to do an update right now. But what they're doing is going and setting up effectivity. So we've already developed the software, we've checked it in, it's been into our system, and it's been in our system since October. But it doesn't become effective until January. So we can go into that software and set that version of the software to not be effective until January 1 of 17. And we can set that previous version of that to end at 12/31 of 16. So we can go through and set up different effectivities, and we do that by going into the history tab and then setting the effectivity based on the different items inside of there. So we can go to each one of those and set the effectivity as well. That way, once again, when we go into our structure, one of the things that we can go in and do is for our filters, right now is filtering everything based on the latest. Well, we can go through and remove that and just simply go through and now do it by date effectivity. And now simply give it the date that you're actually going to look at. All this isn't set up right, or set up completely. So if I go through and change the date, the BOM is going to go in and stay the same. So setting that effectivity, not only for the top level, but for any of the lower level items as well, is also important. So we can make sure that when we go through and set those effectivities, then we can go through and when we do our BOM structures, we can see, okay, what was the BOM back at this particular date? Because once again, the history tab doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what you want. That's just telling you when it was checked in. That doesn't tell you when it was actually put into service. That's where the effectivity dates will come in. So those can be set up. Now, once again, that core functionality, or a lot of that functionality by default is set up inside the change management functionality. So when you're actually doing your changes, there is an option in there to actually set effectivity for your parts in the actual change process. All right, so those are just a few of the things that we're looked at inside of here. So once again, one of the things that we have to look at is, once again, how we're searching for information. So we still have our classification explorer, which is basically still the same general information that we saw here. It's just, once again, a lot easier to get to, and with that, it incorporates some of that functionality into our simple advanced search as well. So we still have the ability to go through and use that classification information to go through and show or use that as a filter when we're going in and creating our functionality. or I'm sorry, searching for our different components. So we still have, our regular searches, categories that we're searching for. If we do want to search for specific libraries, we can go through and specify that. We can specify all libraries, whatever it is that we're searching for, or the individual items here. So that's still there. And then once again, once we go through and we set up our classification information, once again using parts link and make sure we're using our index searching, we can go through and now use this functionality as well. So it makes it a lot easier for us to find. It makes it a lot easier for other people to find as well. So once again, we're just simply updating our librarying system. So instead of going in and just simply browsing for everything, or doing a generic search form, we can use our classifications to go through and find that information. All right. So for demonstration, that's all for now. If there's any questions. Somebody asked me, how about them Bengals? Just in case you guys don't know, I'm actually out of Cincinnati. I don't think I said that. I'm out of Cincinnati. Boundary Systems itself is actually headquartered out of Cleveland, Ohio. But for the Bengals, who they? Wasn't a great season, but hey, there's always next year. So, any questions on anything that we've gone over at this point? How is Classification Explorer incorporated into 10.2? It's the same. It's the same way. You still have to have parts linked to go through and actually set the classifications properly, but it's still incorporated in there. So if I go back into 10.2, yeah, it's still here. It's just up here. So your classification search is still here that you'll have to go through and search. So it's just not incorporated as smoothly down here inside of the basic search functionality. All right. Any additional questions? Oh, how to assign a new classification to an item. So if you have classifications and everything set up inside of your models or in your parts. So if I go into my library, let's go into here, into folders, and I'll just simply come in here and I'll go in and create a new part. Now it's going to be simply a part file. Now what you're doing down here, because it's a part file, it's going to go in and give me just a mechanical classification. So at this point, I would now go in and specify, where I want to go, what type of classification I want to assign to this. So where do I want to go through and put this as far as classification wise? Is it going to be a nut? Is it going to be a bolt? If so, which type of bolt is it going to go through and fit underneath? So this is where we go through and set those different classifications inside of here. So square head, whatever it is, I can go through and use. So as you're going in and creating your actual part is where you're going in and now specifying the information. Now I'll give it just a basic number. Now once we go through and specify the actual classification, the next thing it allows us to do is now go in and fill in the information for that item. So now we can go through and specify the full length, the head diameter, so on and so forth for everything that we need. And these, once again, are the criteria that we would go through and set up for this as well. So what information do we want to go through and use? So as you can see, there's quite a bit that was used. I'm sure they probably took this out of the machinery's handbook to go through and set this up. So once you filled in the information, now it's in that category, and now everything in here is available for you to go through and basically filter by. All right. Any additional questions? Uh, our classification attributes are already built into Windchill. Some are because they have some out-of-the-box classifications, but there are also things that you can go through and customize as well. So depending on what you're going in and setting up, like I said, there are some out-of-the-box classifications that are set up. So yes, they do have some, but then there may be some additional information that you want to go through and add as well. So it may be some internal characteristics that you use to go through and edit as well. But yes, you can go through and set that up. All right, that basically takes us to about an hour. I do thank you guys for your attention during this webinar. And once again, if you have any additional questions or if you think of something after the webinar, once again, feel free to contact me either by phone or by email for any technical questions. If you have any sales questions, you can also contact Carrie Dillon. Once again, her information is there as well. Also, feel free to visit us at our website. We've actually updated our website. So it's a very nice and interactive website that you can get into, which has links to some of our webinars as well, including our YouTube page. Once again, which this webinar will actually be displayed on our YouTube page as well, and any other webinars that we've done in the past are also listed there. And if you do have any technical questions, feel free to contact us as well. You can use support.boundarysys.com, or you can just send an email to support@boundarysys.com. And once again, we'll be more than happy to assist you. So thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week.